And the most of the cars, the later cars, you have the 3 years, which, like I said, 6-cylinder or big block. The other part on the starters is this Bendix cover. Okay, this is the style that you're going to see on 66, probably about mid 66 on up, all the way to 70, and that's going to be this style of Bendix cover. You're going to have the small blocks, the 2-ear style, okay, and they could have that cover too. Like I said, up until from like mid 66 on up. This is where it gets kind of weird. In 68, on the small block cars, they changed the flywheel to 164.2. Okay, that for whatever reason necessitated them to change the nose cone on those cars, and so 68, which includes the Boss cars, 68 on up on the 289 or 302s. You're going to have, of course, the 2-ear nose cone, but it's going to be a taller or wider band across here because the Bendix has a longer throw. And here's the 2-ear for the more common from 67 on back, and you can see it's got a narrower band right here. It's going to be about the same narrow as these right here. These are the most common.
The aluminum there.
The aluminum nose cone, yeah, that goes through here. This is the most typical right here. 68 4-speed only, and the same, of course, would be and these are kind of hard to get. Now, another thing that you kind of throw into the mix is in 68, or excuse me, late 67 and all of 68 to 70. You're going to have the starters are going to be metal stamped with the engineering number. Now, for what we're doing, with the exception of Thoroughbred, this is not something that we're going to be looking at. But it'll have Autolite, and then it'll have the engineering number, and that's on, like I said, on late 67 on up. Now, what I told people is that for our purposes, and rather than have the wrong number, because most of these starters nowadays, they've gone through a recycler and a rebuilder, and they've been rebuilt at least once or twice. And so they use parts, they mix and match. They don't care. The numbers don't correspond to what the actual application is. So most of the time, like for instance, for a big block car, the numbers aren't going to match. You might get lucky on a small block car because there's way more of those than there are big block cars. But I tell the guys just to use some Bondo and cover that over, smooth it out so it goes away. And then there's nobody to talk about the right number or anything like that. Now, the early starters had an ink stamp, and I just kind of did this last minute and put this ink stamp on here. But that was from up until late 67. They used these ink stamps to identify the starters. For our purposes, we really don't have to have the ink stamp. For our judging purposes, though, however, okay, this is an early style Bendix cover. You got these 2 other Bendix covers, okay, they're the same, they're later ones. This round back Bendix cover is a little bit harder to find because it was only on the early starters. So, from the 64.5 up to about mid 66, they use this Bendix cover, this round back style. And that's something that you could, talk to somebody out, either, a note, mention it or whatever, but they all, regardless of when they were made, they all should have a gasket covering this Bendix cover, which you can make out of gasket material, okay, to be put on. And then also, there was a gasket around this band here to cover up, this is open in here, and that covers up and seals this area. This band, holds this Bendix cover. Now, there was a specific material that they used to make this gasket out of. You can use tape, whatever. It's a little bit wider than 1 inch. I always like to make it a little bit wider than this. It was typically a little bit wider than the band. I always make sure you can see it on this upper edge here, just so that people know that there was a gasket there. the same with the Bendix cover. It's wider than the cover, and you can see it kind of sticking out. Now Scott used to sell them, and shame on him for not having them anymore. But I'm supposed to send him a. I've got one left. He says he can make them up, but he says he doesn't have a. Wait a second. So he says he can make them again, and I'm going to send him one. I'm going to send him one that I have, an original one, so he can use it as a template. But now, since I've spotlighted this, he's not going to forget it, and just like I'm going to make sure he doesn't forget about it. He's going to have to make them up for all of us. But anyway.
Well, following you now to send me the gasket.
Well, I'm going to send it to you once I get back home. The first thing I'm going to do is send it to you. Anyway, so the gasket is the gasket in this cover is a very important aspect of the detail of these starters, which we myself included, until I started messing with these things, just kind of discounted and never really paid much attention to it. But the other thing is the way these things were painted. There was a variation, or excuse me, a range of how they painted. They always made sure that the nose cone was not completely painted, okay? Because this is where the starter is grounded. You only got one wire going to this positive wire going to this thing. It comes from the solenoid, and then the rest of it is grounded. The negative side is body ground. So they never completely painted this flange, and there was a variety. Some of them you'll see, more paint than others, but it should be a fog. It should not be a sharp line, okay? And you can do this with a spray can, and fade it in. But this was always covered. The metal was always covered. Your front by the Bendix always had a lot of paint, because that was the only way to get that completely covered. But you're always going to have a certain amount of bare aluminum, or die cast in this case, showing where it was meant by the factory to make good contact, or as good as possible. I mean, they didn't get overboard, as you can see, but this is kind of shows a range. Here's one that's got a lot of it on there, but there's a little bit of that's bare, etc. So there was a range that it could be, and that's kind of like the way it is with most things. What we see, there's a range of how parts can be looked at, or how they were produced. There's no absolute one way, and little or more, that type of thing. So any questions?
Is there a difference between a straight drive and automatic?
No, not until '68. Your 4-speed and automatic, like small block car, okay, or big block, they use the same nose cone. In '68, they went to a different nose cone, and at least that's from all my observations and from the rebuilders I've talked to, etc.